Hello. This time we're going to consider the difference between act and rule utilitarianism. Despite utilitarianism's cold rationality, it's an extremely radical theory. This follows from its making what it is that determines the rightness and wrongness of actions the world, rather than our own commitments enter into the calculation, certainly, but they won't amount to much generally, given the ramifications of our actions, consequences. For example, here's a silly example. Imagine we have a prison warden who, before he goes off to work in the morning, is at the breakfast table. He's reading the morning paper, if there are morning papers anymore. And on the front page are two lead stories. One is on prison overcrowding. He's very familiar with that, of course. And the other is on the shortage of transplantable organs. Given the juxtaposition of the articles, the light bulb goes off in his head, and he realizes that he's sitting on an organ farm where he works, that he has young, healthy prisoners in there with long sentences. They could have unfortunate accidents and save the taxpayers money and provide needed organs at the same time. Could he do this? He would have to do it if he had reason to think that he could get away with it, given how much utility could be generated by this. Or another one. Let's say we've had community has had a series of killings. The community is shocked and terrified. Excuse me. And police finally arrest a suspect. An angry mob shows up at the jail, wanting to string this guy up. The mayor and the police chief realize that they don't have the forces to stop this from happening. And if they do try to stop it, even more mayhem will happen, more people will be killed. So to minimize the disaster, they decide to release the prisoner. Well, whatever happened to the idea of innocent until proven guilty, so on. So you see what the problem is. Whatever maximizes utility is the only thing which is a source of obligation. If a terrorist is able to convince a political leader that he has a dirty bomb, a nuclear device, or he can poison the city's water supply, then as long as he can convince the political leader that he has the capacity to do these terrible things, then the political leader would be obliged to do whatever is short of that amount of harm to have the right balance. That could include pulling people out of their beds in the middle of the night and shooting them in the streets. Any horrible thing you can imagine would be, if it's available among your options, we are obliged to do whatever it is that maximizes utility or minimizes disutility, as the case may be. That's radical. And then it's shocking. Sometime, I think it was in mid-20th century or so, a distinction emerged in utilitarian theory between two varieties, act and rule utilitarianism. And the distinction emerged out of objections from concerns about justice. So rule utilitarianism is a utilitarian theory that was developed to answer objections to utilitarianism from the point of view of justice. The distinction can be made out in terms of the concept of action that we're employing. So what up to now we've called utilitarianism simply now becomes act utilitarianism. So we've been describing utilitarianism in terms of what the options are available to me at any given time. And I think we immediately take that to refer to individual concrete actions that are available to us. It's that leads to radicality. And that's because the world is lumpy, that we're animals, we're embodied, we're at a time and place, and there are only certain actions that are available to us, only certain levers of the world that we have our hands on, things that we can do. It's in terms of those things that we've been discussing that utilitarianism works with. So it's natural to think in terms of the individual actions that are available to us at any given time. But it's that leads to the radicality of utilitarianism. So the idea behind rule utilitarianism here is that there are actually two concepts of actions that apply to virtually any noun. You have individual, so act. Action refers to what? It could refer to what we'll now call an act token. An act token is an individual action. Stopping at this stop sign right now is an act token. An act type is a kind of action that encompasses act tokens. So stopping at stop signs is an act type. Stopping at this stop sign now is a token of the type. So there are two forms of utilitarianism correspond to those two different concepts of action. Act utilitarianism takes act tokens to be the relevant sense of action. Rule utilitarianism takes act types as the relevant concept of action. What it turns, so an act type we can also understand to be a practice. So act types are practices. And the rule utilitarianism is looking not at the maximization of utility right now in terms of the concrete actions, but the utility maximization that's possible with respect to the practice. Stop signs again. The whole idea behind stop signs is that if everybody, all drivers, stop at stop signs whenever they encounter one, no rolling stop, total stop. If everyone does that, there will be fewer collisions over time and utility will be maximized. So it's, again, keep that in mind. The utility in the long run is what the rule utilitarian is after. Understanding, of course, that on any given occasion, performing the practice may well not maximize utility. But that's the hope is that things will even out over time, that justice will be preserved by considering the utility of the practice, not the individual action. So, for example, releasing a prisoner to be lynched, probably not a good practice. Probably something that you do over time as a practice would seem not to be something that will be maximizing utility, does it? All right, so how does the rule utilitarian proceed? Well, there's a very basic procedure. 2 steps. Actions are based on rules, and the rules are based on utility maximization. So what ought I to do? Stop at the stop sign. That's the practice. Why is it a practice? Because it maximizes utility in the long run. That's the idea. So the rule utilitarian wants to have it both ways. The idea of utilitarianism, the basic idea that what makes an action right is consequences, utility, seems sound. But then there's this embarrassing problem about justice. We should know that in theories of distributive justice, that is, how should benefits and burdens be distributed justly? How ought we to pay for healthcare, for example, or how ought we to distribute kidney dialysis machines? That's a problem of distributive justice. Utilitarianism can be understood to be a theory of distributive justice. It's a radical one, again, but it can be construed as such a theory of justice. There is a standard objection that's made to rule utilitarianism. And that is that the distinction between act and rule utilitarianism will tend to collapse. Go back to the procedure. Actions are based on rules. Rules are based on utility maximization. Let's take another stop sign example. We have a truck driver in some flat place, central Illinois, will work if you like. And let's say that fuel conservation is a national priority. And so our truck driver can see all around. And he sees he's on a county road, and then there's a four-way stop down the road, about a mile ahead. You can see that. He's an act utilitarian truck driver. You can see that no one is coming in any direction as he approaches the stop sign. We want to conserve fuel. What's he going to do? Probably blow right through the stops, right? He's not going to collide with anyone. There are no children around to be corrupted by seeing this happen. There's utility to be lost by even slowing down. All right, now take the example of our truck driver is a rule utilitarian truck driver. What's he going to do? He has time to think about it. As he approaches the stop sign, he's thinking, well, the obvious rule that would be in play here is stop at stop signs. But obviously, I'm going to lose utility if I do that. I'm a utilitarian, either kind. You know? I want to maximize utility too. How can I do that? How can I be a good utilitarian, a good rule utilitarian, and still maximize utility this time? All he has to do is to abide by those two, by the procedure. Base your action on a rule. Does that suggest anything? And the rule that you select must be based on utility maximization. Well, we said the obvious rule, let's stop at stop signs. Does it have to be that? Couldn't you amend the rule? Now the rule would be stop at stop signs unless you can see a mile in all directions and no one is coming. You see the problem? You can always do that. And hence, the forms would collapse. Rule utilitarianism would collapse into the act variety because you can always amend a rule. The rejoinder to that makes us think about the nature of rules. And that is that the rules are social. A rule isn't something you can make up in the cab of your truck on the fly. A rule is something that has to be formulated. It has to be taught to people. They have to accept it. It's a social institution. Rules aren't peculiar to individuals, generally. So the standard objection fails for that reason. We should be suspicious, though. As utilitarians, if we ought to be suspicious of rule utilitarianism. Anything that takes us away from the idea of maximizing utility is suspect for a utilitarian. Rule utilitarianism is tending toward formalism. And that's a reason for suspicion if you're consequentialist.